Hello everyone, welcome back to LewisFiction and welcome to the Spectacular Spider-Man College Trilogy. If the College Trilogy for Spectacular Spider-Man was meant to have happened as planned, this is my rendition and my writing of those three movies compiled into one long video with no breaks, no intros, no outros for you guys to sit down, sit back, relax and enjoy. Make sure to hit that subscribe button for more fanfictions like this, and with that said, enjoy the video. We start our story with a backstory explaining Jean DeWolf's history. Her mother resented her father as a child for being in the police force. However, Jean saw it as heroic. Jean always wanted to be like her father and looked up to him every single day. That is until he sadly passed away on the front lines, going out as a hero. This broke her mother, but Jean saw this as an opportunity to step up to her father's shoes and take the mantle. She joined the police force a few years after a man known as George Stacy. They became quite close, as Stacy eventually ended up becoming the captain of the NYPD. It wasn't until a year later or so that George Stacy unfortunately passed away at the hands of falling rubble in a battle with Spider-Man, Carnage, and Venom. Jean DeWolf would go on to resent Spider-Man for his death, but as she fulfilled her dream and stepped up to become the police captain, she started to work with Spider-Man more often, becoming extremely close with him and taking a liking to their friendship. And this is where our story begins, as we open with Jean DeWolf's dead body stricken over her wooden floorboards with a bullet hole straight through her stomach in the cold dead of night. We cut to 6 hours earlier and to Peter. He is at frontline dropping pictures off for Robbie Robertson. Robbie thanks Peter as he says once again he has no idea how he gets great pictures of Spider-Man. Peter tells Robbie that he said before him and Spider-Man are kind of acquainted. Once again, it's obvious, just like in Season 5 and throughout the series as a whole, that Robbie has an inkling that there is more than meets the eye here with Peter. As Peter says that he's got to go, he has a play that he's been invited to tonight. Robbie says to send his love to the main star, and Peter says he will. Peter is swinging through the city frantically. Mary Jane's first college show starts in 10 minutes. MJ at the end of the series decided to go into acting school, and it's her first major performance, and Peter can't miss it. He has flowers in his hand which he is trying not to destroy through the gusting wind of the evening sky. Peter just about arrives outside the entrance to go into the theatre and is just about changed into his suit as the doorman tells Peter to tuck his shirt in. However, police cars start to race past. Peter says that they can't be serious, as in classic Parker fashion, Peter has something to attend to as Spider-Man. Peter leaves the flowers at the door with a note saying to MJ Watson, "I had something on, love Pete." Spider-Man swings through the city heroically until we get our first major action set piece. A whole building is on fire and people are trapped inside. Spider-Man investigates as he rescues some people. Going back in to look for more, he finds a man in a hazmat suit staring straight back at him. Peter says he doesn't suppose he's the fire department, as the man sprays fire straight at him, Spider-Man dodging and bouncing back. Spider-Man asks, "Who the heck are you?" The man says he calls himself Butane. Spider-Man will say, "You'd think that after all these years, villains would start becoming more creative with their names." Butane and Spider-Man engage in battle, and it's a pretty easy win for Spider-Man. However, during their battle, the fire reached a gas canister stored away in the far corner of the house, which explodes, sending Butane and Spider-Man flying out of the house. Spider-Man's costume ripped and pride bruised. He stands up wounded as he looks around to see the chaos in the street and the panic. Sirens blurting and people hyperventilating. He looks to his right to see Butane on the floor, dead, in front of him. The explosion, killing him in the process. We cut to 30 minutes later, as Jean DeWolf is on the scene talking to Spider-Man away from the crime scene. Stan Carter, Jean DeWolf's partner, is also there. Spider-Man expresses his distaste in himself for what happened. Carter doesn't look impressed either, as he scowls at Spider-Man. Jean DeWolf goes on to explain that Butane was a man called Jasper Ward. He was mentally ill. The house he burnt to the ground was his own. He'd spent a few years prior in an institution. He'd always sketch out drawings of him fighting Spider-Man. He believed himself to be a supervillain of yours, she will say. Peter places his head in his hands as he takes a deep sigh. Carter can't even look at Spider-Man, as DeWolf reassures him. She places her hand on Peter's shoulder and says she understands what he does for the city. She says you could have never known. You were just trying to do what's right. She'll tell him to chin up, as she tells Stan that they're leaving. We cut to MJ, who finishes the show, as she steps outside in front of the theatre to see flowers and a note. She picks it up and reads it, and she smiles as Spider-Man swings above her. We cut back to Peter in his apartment. It's small, but homey. Since the end of Season 5, he has decked it out in some of his favourite movie posters and science equipment. There's even a sewing machine in the corner of the room with his Spider-Man costume half hanging out of. His heart still sank from the events that have just transpired. He decides to turn the TV on to try and take his mind off things, when he gets a report of the events that day. In some interviews with the citizens of New York, they call for Spider-Man to retire. Some even call for his arrest, stating that if he knew how to handle the situation properly, none of this would have happened, and Butane would still be alive. Of course, Peter could have done nothing about it, as he had no idea about the gas canister, but the public reception isn't looking good. On the surface, Spider-Man has no involvement with the public, other than a few frontline reports every few weeks. The TV cuts over to an interview with Stan Carter, Jean DeWolf's partner, as he says that he doesn't like Spider-Man, and he never has. He has to be registered as an official force by the US government and New York City Council, or retire, because things like today happen when you don't follow the books. Peter turns the TV off. It's all to do with Spider-Man, all to do with the events of today, and he just falls asleep, half hanging off his bed. He then wakes up the next day to see messages from both Robbie Robertson, his boss at Frontline, and MJ. He replies to MJ first, saying he's sorry he couldn't make it to her show last night. If she's been watching the news, she probably knows why. And then he opens Robbie's message to see him trying to get a hold of Peter multiple times. Peter says that Robbie doesn't usually message him that much unless something major has happened. Peter turns on the news to see the unfortunate news of the death of Captain Jean DeWolf. Peter's eyes widened. He can't believe it. Peter swings his way over to the police station to see what's going on. However, on his way over, he catches glimpses of people rallying for the arrest and trial of Spider-Man. Peter thinks to himself that it probably isn't the smartest idea to show up at the police station at this moment in time with all this going on, especially since that Stan Carter is really against him. We cut to Stan Carter, however, who is sat in Jean's office. The station is in chaos, but he is the only one that is calm. Someone enters the office and says he's wanted outside for an interview, and asks if they're going to give statements right now. At first, Carter says no, but then he stops the officer before they walked out of the office, and says he'll do it. Carter makes his way outside, and says the death of Jean DeWolf is one that brings us much sadness, but we have to move forward, and catch whoever committed this crime. In the meantime, Carter doesn't want this to distract from the fact that they need to apprehend Spider-Man, and as police captain, his main mission is to get him arrested. Spider-Man will be brought to justice for his actions. Carter thanks the media as he heads back inside. Instead of confronting Carter and the police force himself, Spider-Man heads directly to Jean DeWolf's apartment to check it out for himself. He needs to find clues as to who did this. The room is dark, as all the lights are turned off. The only light that entered the room was through a beam of sunlight that would occasionally be blocked by clouds. He gets into the apartment through the window, only for a spine-chilling sensation to be sent through his body. Someone else is already here, he feels. Spider-Sense. Spider-Man jumps out of the way as an extended billy club penetrates the wall next to him. Spider-Man will look up as he sees the weapon in the wall. He quickly turns his head to the side as a man's foot extended his way, kicking Spider-Man in the chest. Spider-Man tries to fight back, but the man is too fast, too experienced in hand-to-hand combat. Peter uses his Spider-Sense to power through though, as he starts to manage to dodge the man's attacks. However, the man walks through the beam of sunlight. Peter could clearly see who it was. A man dressed in a full red costume, small horns on the top, only with his mouth not covered, and the letter D printed on the front of the costume. Peter asks, "Who are you meant to be?" as the man stops in his tracks. He pulls the billy club out of the wall, and says he shouldn't have sneaked up on him like that. Spider-Man is confused and asks, "Who is he?" The man says that's not what's important. The man goes on to tell Spider-Man that he shouldn't be here. He's not exactly got the best public reception at the moment. Spider-Man asks, what is he? Some kind of vigilante? Because that's his thing. The man responds with saying that, I guess you could say that. Spider-Man will ask the man how come they've never crossed paths before, and the man tells him that he works from the lower streets of Hell's Kitchen, and isn't as glamorized in the media as him. He says he usually works on petty theft, but this is something that involved him. Spider-Man feels slightly offended. He says he isn't glamorized. The man tells Spider-Man that he tries to stay out of the spotlight, but I guess his red and blue costume doesn't help him. Spider-Man asks, what do I call you? And the man says Daredevil. Spider-Man scoffs and says that's stupid. Daredevil responds by saying Spider-Man is better. Spider-Man shrugs it off and says true. As they both search the apartment, Spider-Man asks how Daredevil got wrapped up in all this. Daredevil goes on to explain that a judge he worked with closely got murdered in the same manner. There were no leads, only that his ID badge to show that he was a New York City judge was missing from his body and his uniform. Daredevil has reason to believe that these murders are connected. Daredevil goes on to say that the judge he worked with was actually a big fan of Spider-Man. Spider-Man will say he's blushing. Spider-Man says that he's never worked with anyone before. Maybe them teaming up could make this mystery a whole lot easier. Daredevil says that he works alone. He kneels down and sniffs. He picks up on a scent. Spider-Man asks, what is he doing? Daredevil says he's picked up on something. Spider-Man says, don't tell me your superpowers are a super sense of smell, because that would be really cool but also really lame at the same time. Daredevil says they're not. He just has heightened senses, not a superpower. Spider-Man, confused, just rolls with it. Spider-Man sees into DeWolf's bedroom as he keeps on investigating. He sees her uniform and some police gear hanging off the back of the chair. When he notices the badge is gone, Spider-Man thinks back to what Daredevil said and calls him into the room. Daredevil says his suspicions were correct. He didn't think it was a coincidence that he picked up on the same scent at both crime scenes. Daredevil looked over to Spider-Man and thanks him for his help, but he should take it from here. Spider-Man points his finger and says he's a veteran in this game now. He isn't going to step aside when a criminal needs to be brought in. Daredevil tells Spider-Man that this goes deeper than some murders. He points the finger back at Spider-Man, saying that if he's seen hanging around crime scenes like this, it isn't going to make his case with the public any easier. Daredevil says trust him. Spider-Man says, what are you, some kind of lawyer? Daredevil says you could say that. In reassurance, Daredevil says he's done a good job, and he doesn't believe what the public is saying about him, but he really, really should step aside. And with that, Spider-Man swings off into the distance. As he swings through the city, doubts run through his head. Is he good enough? What if his reputation with the city is never repaired? What if he can't build that trust back again? Spider-Man arrives back at his apartment. He sits down on his bed when he gets a message from MJ asking if he wants to hang out. Peter says yes. We cut to them both on a date. Peter apologizes for not being at the show, and MJ says it's okay. She's got plenty of more performances in the next few weeks that he can come to. MJ asks Peter if he's doing okay. It's been pretty rough as Spider-Man recently. Peter says yeah. He's just concerned that he can never recover his trust with the city. After May's death, he just tried to do his best, the best Spider-Man he could possibly be. But he's letting them down. He's letting May down. MJ will tell him that's not true, and to give it time. Peter holds his head down, but she lifts it back up. Peter sighs and asks if they can just have a normal night. No Spider-Man, no crime, no nothing. Just them two. MJ says of course they can, as she wraps his arms around him, and they kiss each other. MJ says that they should catch a movie and grab Italian food. Peter says that sounds like a perfect night. After their date ends, they head back to Peter's apartment. They sit down on the end of the bed, opposite the TV, as Peter falls asleep on MJ's shoulder. She strokes his hair as the TV blurts out for Spider-Man's arrest once again. She will look down at him as she says only if they knew how much you cared. MJ then sees a text message from Robbie on Peter's phone. She thinks that's odd, his boss wouldn't be messaging him at this time of night. When she checks, it's a message saying for Peter to contact Spider-Man and tell him to come to the frontline offices immediately, ASAP, it's an emergency. MJ shakes Peter's head. As he wakes up, MJ tells Peter that Robbie's in trouble. Peter checks his phone and tells MJ to stay here. He'll be right back. Spider-Man swings out the window towards Frontline dramatically. We cut to Robbie, who is hiding under a table in the offices at Frontline. He is shaken up by something as we see bullet holes through the glass window beside him. We then hear footsteps gradually approach him. A head peeks around the corner, and it's Spider-Man. Robbie breathes a sigh of relief. Spider-Man asks if he's okay. Peter told him that he was in trouble. Robbie explains the situation. A man is in this building. He came up through the stairs and shot at him as he was about to make his way home. Robbie ran through the offices and hid here. Spider-Man asks if he saw him leave. Robbie says no. Then Spider-Sense. Peter pushes Robbie out of the way as Spider-Man takes a bullet straight to the shoulder. A man stands at the other end of the corridor. As Peter webs the gun out of his hand, Spider-Man tries to web the man, but he dodges and hides in the shadows. And then out of nowhere, Daredevil drops from the shadows and engages in battle with the man in the purple mask. However, the man is trained in combat, as Daredevil couldn't get the upper hand. Spider-Man tries to web him again, and then Daredevil steps in front of him and in his way. They end up tripping over each other, allowing for the man to escape. Spider-Man shouts towards Daredevil that he had that covered. Daredevil turns around saying, I thought I told you to stay out of this. Spider-Man asks, where did you come from anyway? Daredevil says that he's been tracking him for the last few hours and he tracked him here. He almost got him, but now you got in my way. Spider-Man says I could say the same thing about you. After the argument cools down, they both check up on Robbie and see if he's okay. Spider-Man is bleeding as Robbie ties something around his shoulder. Spider-Man thanks Robbie. Daredevil takes a sigh. He says they can't keep getting in each other's way. It's clear they're both not going to give up, and to truce. He offers his hand out to Spider-Man, and he takes it, saying truce. They'll work together from here. Daredevil asks Robbie what he wanted with him, and Robbie says that he's not so sure. That's when a newspaper catches the corner of Daredevil's eye. A positive piece on Spider-Man, defending him despite all the calls for his arrest. Daredevil asks Robbie if he's pro-Spider-Man, if Frontline is a pro-Spider-Man company. Robbie says, yeah, we post positive stories about Spider-Man, and he asks why. Daredevil turns to Spider-Man and says, the connection is you. Spider-Man looks confused. As Daredevil tells Spider-Man that all the people that have died all support you. Gene DeWolf, captain of the NYPD, in a position of power and supporter of Spider-Man. The judge, massive position of power with the legal system and supporter of Spider-Man. Robbie has a massive influence through his news company and is pro-Spider-Man. Spider-Man will say that doesn't really narrow it down though, because the suspect could be anyone, as everyone is kind of on his back at the moment. Daredevil goes on to say that that will help determine who the next victim might be, as he walks over to the gun that was webbed off the man. He picks it up and wipes Spider-Man's web off it and analyzes it. The NYPD, Daredevil will say. This is an NYPD gun. It's an inside job, he will think to himself. Peter, however, thinks about what Daredevil said before about the connection between the victims, and that's when he realizes. The next victim. It's himself. Not Spider-Man, but Peter Parker. He's the only one who takes clear photos of Spider-Man in the whole city and publishes them to a pro-Spider-Man news source. MJ, Spider-Man will think to himself. The man is probably heading to Peter's right now. Peter will swing off into the distance, as Daredevil will follow. Spider-Man gets back to his apartment, and no sign of MJ. He starts to freak out, as Daredevil also arrives on the scene. Daredevil says, "So this Peter Parker guy, he takes photos of you?" Spider-Man says yes, and his girlfriend is missing. Spider-Man will say he's taken her. He's taken her to lead Parker out. Daredevil says yes. The same man that they encountered at Frontline has been here. His scent is all over the place. They both head over to the police station. Everyone has head home for the night. Spider-Man asks, what are they doing here while MJ is missing? Daredevil says it's an inside job, right? Spider-Man says he doesn't know. Daredevil says he's sure it is. And with that information, they are sure to find evidence here. He tells Spider-Man to start searching the lockers. As he does, he comes across Gene DeWolf's locker and sees messages in it celebrating her life and her service to the police force. Spider-Man looks down slightly, remembering his time working with her. He searches a few more until he reaches Stan Carter's locker and opens it. Peter crouches down, when underneath some of the clothes, he finds the judge's ID badge and Gene DeWolf's police badge. He calls Daredevil over saying he thinks he's found their mystery killer. Daredevil smirks as the scent matches the locker's odor. We cut to Stan Carter's apartment as MJ is tied up in the corner. MJ asks what the hell he wants with her, and he says he wants her boyfriend, Peter Parker. MJ asks who is he? He turns around and he says to call him the Sin-Eater. MJ asks, what has Peter done to him? And Sin-Eater screams back saying, no more questions. MJ flinches slightly as she slowly tries to untie herself from the back of the chair. She's been in situations like this before. None of this is new to her. And when the Sin-Eater wasn't looking, she manages to break free and whack him round the back of the head as hard as she could. However, the Sin-Eater gets back up and grabs her, detaining her. But before a fight could properly break out, Spider-Man and Daredevil arrive through the window. Spider-Man shouts to get his hands off her, but the Sin-Eater pulls out a gun and points it at MJ's head. He laughs as he says it's over for him. Spider-Man tells Carter to put the gun down. They know it's him. Daredevil cautiously waits, not to take another step, listening very closely. Stan will ask how they found out. Spider-Man says that doesn't matter. He has to give it up. Carter shouts, saying that he ruined this city. Everything he stands for has ruined this city. George Stacy, dead because of him. May Parker, dead because of him. Jasper Ward, dead because of him. Everyone dies because of him, and it's time he and anyone that supports him was brought to justice, to cleanse this world of Spider-Man, to cleanse New York City for good. MJ quivers as Carter's grip on the gun gets tighter. Carter says the only way he lets her go is if Spider-Man hands himself over. Spider-Man holds his hands up and kneels down and says he's all his. Carter releases MJ as Daredevil steps in and pulls her to one side, still carefully listening to the sounds around him. Carter has his gun pointed directly at Spider-Man's head. He says he's fast, but not faster than a bullet, so he wouldn't try anything if he were them. He says it's time, finally, for him to die. MJ screams, but Daredevil smiles as Carter pulls the trigger, but nothing. There are no bullets in the gun. It's not even loaded. Daredevil extends his arm and whacks Carter with his billy club, knocking him out. Spider-Man looks up as MJ hugs him. Spider-Man asks, how did you know? Daredevil could hear the echo within the gun's barrel. This whole time he was listening as Carter stumbled around the room, listening for the echoes within the gun. The sound frequencies indicated to no bullets. It wasn't even loaded the whole time. Some police captain he was, Spider-Man will say. The police will arrive on the scene as Stan Carter is arrested. Daredevil says it was nice working with Spider-Man as he shakes his hand. Spider-Man said that they should do this more often. Daredevil says he wants to keep out the spotlight, but if their paths cross again, he'll be more than willing to work with him. Daredevil tells Spider-Man that he should make amends with the city. Spider-Man says he doesn't know how to. Daredevil says, get more involved. Show New York that you're one of them, not above them. He says, good luck, Peter, as he leaves. Spider-Man says, "Wait, how the heck did you know?" "Of course he knows," Peter will say to himself. We cut to the final couple of scenes, where Peter designs an app where people can report crimes and general inconveniences that Spider-Man can help with, helping him getting more involved with the city, making him feel more a part of it. We get a montage of scenes of people using the app, and Spider-Man going to help them. He helps a cat out of a tree, talks to a little kid reassuring him after his dog went missing, and even helps an old lady cross the street. Spider-Man becomes more humane in the eyes of the city, rather than a glamorous superhero. His reputation is repaired, and Spider-Man is one with New York, more than ever before. And as the character realizes, and as the audience realizes as well, that it's not just about being a vigilante which makes Spider-Man Spider-Man. It's about who he is as a person. It's about the responsibility to help everyone and anyone, no matter what the inconvenience. And with that, we end our first film in the College Trilogy here. As the city starts to regain its trust back with Spider-Man, an old foe from way back in Season 2 enters back onto the scene. That's right, it's time for Kraven's last hunt. In the dim confines of his prison cell, time seemed to stretch endlessly for Sergei Kravenov, better known as Kraven the Hunter. Locked away for his past crimes, he had an ample opportunity to contemplate his actions and their consequences. But more than that, he had time to reflect on the man that he once was, and the man that he wanted to become. Since Kraven was put away during the events of Season 2, he had reformed. But not only that, he had been given a serum developed by Dr. Connors' new research after curing Max Dillon of his electro powers to turn him back into the man he used to be, Sergei Kravenov. Today was trial day, and Sergei was feeling confident. His sentence had already been reduced for good behavior and his willingness to comply. And after everything, Sergei was a free man. After leaving Rikers and making it back to the mainland New York, he took the smell in. Freedom, at last. Sergei would return home, the first flight back to Africa, where he would finally reunite with his wife, Calypso. But something wasn't right. Calypso wasn't happy to see him, not one bit. She would tell him that he had become someone else, that he had no self-respect or respect for her and their relationship. Sergei Kravenov had disowned their family with his actions, and she doesn't want to see him ever again. Sergei pleaded to her, telling her that he had changed, he had become a better man, but she wouldn't have it, as she told him to leave. Sergei left, broken and distraught. Everything he'd been building to, everything he'd worked for in prison, had been thrown back in his face by someone that didn't even want him anymore. Sergei was angry, furious even, but he had nowhere to eject the anger, no one to point it at other than himself. And in his own denial, Sergei turned to the only other man who had a hand in making his life a living hell: Spider-Man. If Calypso won't have him back, there is only one more purpose for Sergei Kravenov: the defeat of Spider-Man. Determined to end his legacy on a note of triumph, he must prove his worth. He must prove that he is the superior warrior, the superior hunter, once and for all. And with that, it brings us to the start of the film. Meanwhile, in a corner of Broadway, New York City, Mary Jane Watson finds herself on the cusp of fame. It's 1 year after the events of the last film, and we cut to MJ as she's performing on stage in front of a live theatre audience. She is on her second year of college, but will do acting work on the side. Her reputation as an actress is forever growing, and it's clear to us at the beginning of this film that she is making really positive inroads on where she wants to be and where she wants to take her career. The show would end, and it would be her best performance yet. As the curtains would draw to a close, she would meet backstage with her co-stars. They would all get talking about their personal lives. One co-star would go on to say how her and her boyfriend are saving up for a mortgage, and another co-star would say that him and his fiancée just started renting an apartment together in Midtown. As MJ sits quietly in the corner listening into everyone else, they eventually turn to her and ask her about her and Peter, as they've known and grown to like MJ over the last few months. MJ will be sheepish and will quiver away in the corner as she's got nothing to add. Peter is just a photographer. He's not at college. Heck, he can barely even pay for his own rent. MJ knows why, however, she feels a sense of jealousy rise over her. All of these people she works with are starting to move on in life. They're starting to settle down and be the people that they set out to be, the people that they wanted to be from a very young age. But MJ is stuck. She loves Peter more than anything in the world, but she'll start to question herself. When will it be time for her and Peter to move in? And if so, could Peter even afford it? He doesn't have any qualifications and he doesn't even go to college. It's not even like he'd have a tuition fee or anything. She has a life and a career, and it's not waiting up for anyone, especially Peter. She meets with Peter after the show, as Peter waits with a few roses outside the stage door. They kiss and Peter says it was amazing, saying that it was her best performance yet. MJ thanks him, but Peter can sense something's wrong. MJ had always been a closed-off individual, but ever since her and Peter got to know each other through the seasons prior, she had come out of her shell to him and had become the person that she'd always wanted to be. But at this moment in time, she was more feeling like that closed-off person again. Peter would question her, but MJ would kinda blow it off as nothing. But Peter insists. MJ doesn't know how to put it, and panickingly tells Peter that he needs to go to college, not knowing what to say to him, and not knowing how to regulate her emotions properly. Peter says that he doesn't really have time for college, and she knows that. With great power comes great responsibility. MJ will cut him off and say that she knows, but he needs to at some point. She will say that, what are you going to do, just be a photographer for the rest of your life? And Peter will be taken back by this. As the audience, we know this is not what MJ intended to come across, but Peter will respond by saying that he's happy for her and everything, but just because he isn't becoming some famous actress doesn't mean what he does as a career is a dead end. MJ will say that she knows that, but he can barely afford the apartment that he lives in now, and will ask Peter to think about the future. But with Peter still caught up in the previous part of the conversation, he will say that he's trying his best. This will slightly annoy Peter. The rest of the night will turn sour because of this, and they will both return home. MJ's friends moving forward in life is making her feel left behind, but she doesn't know how or what to say to Peter. She blew it, she'd think to herself as she'd return home that night. We cut to Sergei Kravenov as he lands back in New York. However, if he is to hunt for Spider-Man, he can't be seen out on the streets, especially after his early release. So he decides on the perfect disguise. He holds out a box in front of him, and he pulls out a variation of the symbiote Spider-Man suit. Of course, just made of cloth. He thinks to himself that if word gets out that another Spider-Man is floating about New York, this is sure to get his attention, and then the hunt can finally begin. We cut to Peter, who is dropping off photos for Robbie at Frontline. However, before Peter could leave, Robbie interjects, stating that he's heard reports that Venom is back in town. Maybe Peter could snatch some photos of him. Robbie will tell Peter that he's heard Venom's gone good now, so he must mean well. Peter is confused. Venom operates in San Francisco. Why would he be back in New York? Peter takes what Robbie said on board and leaves. Spider-Man swings through the city when he gets a text. He opens his phone and sees it's from MJ. She asks if they could hang out tonight at her college dorm, and Peter narrates to himself saying that he hopes he wasn't too harsh on her earlier. Maybe MJ is right. Peter will think to himself. Is he really going to just swing aimlessly, take photos, kick some supervillain's butt, and then make a few dollars just to barely survive in an apartment that is definitely falling to pieces? He doesn't think so, and when you think about it like that, it does kind of seem like MJ was onto something. But before he could reply to a message and agree, his spider senses go off sharply. Spider-Man dodges out of the way of a spearing laser beam that cracks the wall beside him. Spider-Man looks around and sees a man on top of a building opposite him, with a symbiote Spider-Man costume on. Peter thinks to himself that this can't be good. But one thing's for sure, that's not Venom, and for two reasons. Number one, like mentioned earlier, Venom has gone good, and he wouldn't attack Peter like that. And two, Venom never sets Peter's spider sense off. Spider-Man engages the man, asking who he is. However, the man doesn't respond and begins to fight Spider-Man. The man is brutal and quick. Despite Peter being confused, he senses some form of familiarity within the fight. It's like he's fought this person before. However, before Peter could come to any conclusion, the man shoots another beam at Peter, shocking him and knocking him out. Awakening in a place that he did not recognize, Peter touches his face to realize he still has his mask on. Whoever it was wasn't interested in him, that's for sure. He slowly turned around and looked up to see a shadowy figure at the other end of the room. His vision blurred. He couldn't quite make out what was going on. He tried to web the man, but then Peter found himself stripped of his web shooters, and his eyes came more into focus. He was face to face with an old foe, Kraven the Hunter. Peter just about utters his name, before asking what the heck is all of this. The Hunter revealed his grand plan, a final showdown to determine the true warrior between them. Peter pleads, saying this is not necessary. Kraven will say no weapons, no web shooters, just a fight, like two grown men. Can't they just end all of this and talk it out like men, says Peter? Sergei will say that real men don't talk. Real men fight to decide. Despite Spider-Man's pleas, Kraven's obsession with proving himself leads to a brutal confrontation between the two. Peter doesn't even know where he is, but during the battle he catches glimpses of the outside world. It's nighttime, lightning crashes as thunder rages in the background. It doesn't look like New York. Where could he possibly be? However, Peter during this time was also trying to break through to Kraven, to try and get him to stop fighting, but Sergei's only purpose bled through into his rage and his anger. And before you knew it, Kraven had come out on top, battering Spider-Man down once and for all, using all of his might. He is victorious, as we get a shot of Kraven ominously hovering over Spider-Man's limp body. We cut to MJ, who sits in her college dorm staring at the message that she sent to Peter all of those hours ago. It is currently the evening and she still had no response. She'll blame herself, saying that she should have never brought Peter's situation up like that. That's probably the reason he's ignoring her. However, her overthinking has to wait, as one of her flatmates, who also happens to be a co-star of hers that we saw at the beginning of the movie, will walk past and see MJ sulking on her bed through the crack of the door. She will knock and will open the door slowly, asking if MJ is okay. MJ will say that she is, and her friend will say that she clearly isn't. As they sit on the bed together, her friend manages to get MJ talking. This scene will be intertwined as we cut back and forth between them and Sergey digging a hole in the ground. MJ will say that she's afraid that she's pushed Peter away, when all that she wants is for them to get more serious. She's thinking of the future, and she's afraid that what Peter is doing is keeping them in the past. Her friend will tell her that she just has to be honest with him. Tell him what you really, really want. And as her friend pats MJ on the shoulder and walks out of the room, Sergey finally finished the hole as he drops Spider-Man to the bottom of it and covers it up as the click of the door shuts behind MJ. We fade back in. It's dark, it's cold, it's lonely. Spider-Man finds himself underground, buried alive. Peter panics for a second before realizing that if he panics, it'll just make things worse. He takes a deep breath as he sees crumbs of soil fall from the roof. He's buried, he'll think to himself. Spider-Man will say this is it. Even with the proportionate strength of a spider, how the heck will he get out of this? The soil on top of him is already too heavy, not considering the fact that he's at an angle where he can't even use his full force of brute strength. Spider-Man will bash on the ceiling to no avail. Peter will say to himself that he's going to run out of oxygen soon, so he's just got to stay calm. And that's when he gets a call. His phone. It's still in his pocket. Peter reaches for it to see if he can contact someone, but it falls out, just out of arm's reach. And without any web shooters, Peter can't even web it towards himself either. However, the way it fell, the cracked face of the phone faces to Peter so he could see exactly who it was. It was MJ. And as Peter can't quite reach the phone to answer, it rings out. But then it rings again. And once again, it goes to answer phone. Peter sheds a tear and says that he's sorry under his breath. We cut to MJ's perspective. As the phone rings out, it goes to voicemail, and she decides to speak her mind. Peter won't answer the phone, but that won't stop her. That won't stop MJ being honest. She says that she knows he's probably not taking her calls because of what she said, but she just wanted to say that she was sorry. But that's not what her intention was. And just like the scene prior, MJ narrates over the top as we cut back and forth between the two, as Peter realizes, wait a minute, he still has signal. He can't be that far underground. And with another sudden burst of energy, he starts to bash the coffin. MJ continues narrating. She says that she's going to be honest. They're not getting any younger and careers are moving forward, and they're adults now. Every day she gets ever closer to finishing college and being out in the real world. MJ begins to beat around the bush, when finally she comes out with it. She'll ask Peter if he wants to move in with her. She's been thinking about it for a while, and she thinks it's time. She says please to call her back, and that she loves him. And on that line, Peter, not holding back any longer, sends a crackling punch through the wooden coffin, burst into the soil above, and before you knew it, rose Spider-Man from the dead. You can't defeat him that easily. As Spider-Man made his way back across to the house, he scoped out his surroundings. He's in upstate New York, not far from home. This must be where Kraven was hiding, he'll think to himself. We cut to Kraven inside the house, meditating with half a smirk on his face. His mission complete, his purpose fulfilled. He is the ultimate hunter. And the anger, rage, and guilt that came over him from the rejection of his ex-wife Calypso had suddenly passed due to the validation that Spider-Man's defeat gave his ego. However, with a gritted voice, Spider-Man slammed through the back door, limped into the hallway, and shouted his name. Kraven's smile suddenly transformed back into one of sadness and remorse. Sergey stands up, not ready for battle this time, not even tempted to battle. He looks at Spider-Man as he stands at the other end of the corridor and says one thing: congratulations. Spider-Man will ask Sergey what kind of sick and twisted game is he playing. Sergey tells Spider-Man about everything that led up to this moment. How their battle was the only thing that meant anything to him in this moment. And clearly, Spider-Man is the more fierce warrior, far superior to Sergey Kravenov. Peter tells Sergey that he needs help. Sergey says that he's content now. He has his answer. As he pulls out a vial of serum, Peter asks, what is that? Sergey says something that will complete him. Peter's spider sense goes nuts as Sergey injects himself with it. Peter rushes over to try and stop him, but it's too late. Spider-Man holds him by the collar and screams at him, what have you done? And that's when Sergey tells Spider-Man thank you, as his arms and his legs go limp, and his entire body ascends. Spider-Man holds Sergey Kravenov in his arms for one final time. Spider-Man takes his mask off and closes his eyes. We see the raw emotion and regret in Peter's face. He couldn't do anything to save him. Spider-Man returns back to Manhattan as he catches back up with MJ. They hug and kiss and reunite. In the aftermath, Peter and MJ found solace in each other's arms, a testament to their love for each other. MJ will ask Peter the all-important question, should they move in together? Peter says yeah, he'd love to, and agrees that they are at that stage in their relationship. She's right, they've been together for a while now and it's time. Peter also says that he's been thinking of applying to college. He says that he thought about what she said and she's right. Peter doesn't want to be in a dead-end job for the rest of his life, so he's applying at ESU to do physics, and that way him and MJ can put their student finance and tuition fees together to rent themselves a small apartment near the campus. This will be a big step in their lives. There's no Aunt May, there's no Aunt Anna Watson, there's no one to guide them, but them two, as they take the next step in their relationship. All's well that ends well for our loving couple, as we come to the end of the main story. However, something else is on the horizon. We will cut to a post-credit scene which will be following a man known as Dr. Jonathan On, experimenting with portal technology. After his life's work, he's finally done it. He's finally made it work. And with that little tease, we come to the end of the film. We skip 1 year later into the future. Peter and MJ have been living with each other for some time now. However, not everything is as it seems, as we are reintroduced to our main characters with some interesting twists along the way. This is the finale. This is everything you've been waiting for. This is The Curse of the Spot. August 2012. Peter Parker soars through the sky in his Spider-Man costume. It's a few days before his birthday. Everything is going well at the moment. Peter will narrate using his inner monologue as he always does, catching us up from the past year. He's been at college for a year already studying physics. He will tell us how he's also gotten really close with the professor. And with all of that going on, he still had the time to be Spider-Man, and make a bit of extra money on the side by handing in photos to Frontline. Although nothing major has happened, Peter has gotten his life pretty balanced out, and for once, Peter Parker is doing okay. Things are looking up, but that's not the best part. As Peter lands on top of a building, he'll reach into a pouch in his suit, where he usually keeps spare web cartridges. In a glimmer, he pulls out a shiny silver banded ring with a cyan blue diamond on top. He will say the best part of his life recently is the girl who used to live next door, Mary Jane Watson, and tomorrow night, he's going to ask her to marry him. The past year or so, Peter and MJ have been living together as MJ further progresses her acting career through her acting college, which she is now in her third and final year of. They're both still young, but that doesn't bother Peter. He knows he's ready. He knows that he'll never spend his days with anyone other than her. She is the one for him, his soulmate, his lifelong dream. And in this moment, as Peter looks over the ring in the New York City skyline, he thinks to himself, how? Is he good enough? This is something that Peter Parker would somehow get wrong. This is something that the Parker look would have something to say about. With many self-doubts clouding his mind, the typical Peter Parker self-doubt talk will consume his every thought. Luckily, he has something to take his mind off it, as a store bell rings below and Peter swoops down to stop a crime. Dodging, weaving, and threading his way through the criminals, Peter also showcases at this moment in time how experienced he is as Spider-Man now. He's not a teenager anymore. He's a veteran Spider-Man. We've come a very long way. We cut to the next day. Peter is at college, just starting his second year. It's his first week, but everything is largely the same. It's business as usual. Peter will enter his class, and this is where we will be introduced to the professor Peter mentioned earlier. His name? Professor Jonathan On. On will introduce the class, but will smirk and nod to Peter as he walks in. Peter sits down towards the middle row, and the class goes on. On signifies his intelligence. He's calculated, passionate, and exciting. No wonder his class was a hit. The lesson will be on black holes and time travel. On will go into excruciating detail about the structural integrity of wormholes and space-time, saying that it's a part of science that is largely left to be theorized about rather than to be executed and tested. On is the best in the business when it comes to this sort of stuff, and it'll be showcased and completely on display here. After the lesson, Peter will catch up with Professor On. They will shake each other's hand and will be pleased to see each other after the summer break. We will get the impression that Peter is top of the class, and the clear favourite. Professor On will tell Peter that he's unfortunately not going to be able to make next week's class, and Peter asks why. And Professor On tells Peter quite nonchalantly that it's his wife's funeral next week. Caught off guard by this, Peter takes a step back, not expecting him to deliver such horrific news. Peter says he's so sorry for his loss, and On says it's okay. It happened over the summer, and he then brushes it off and says he doesn't want to talk about it. Professor On clearly is hiding away from it, running, and not confronting his loss. He's bottling his emotions up, and this will be clear. He doesn't want to confront his wife's death, and this will be on show here. On leaves Peter and tells him to have a good day. However, on his way out, Professor On drops some files on the floor. Blueprints. Peter helps him and picks them up for him. Peter notices, however, some kind of machine printed on the front. This was strange for Peter. On never kept secrets, especially science-related, and this was something that Peter has never seen before or never seen Professor On talk about. On grabbed the blueprints and left for the day. We then cut to Peter returning home. MJ is in the living room watching television, and Peter startles her. She shouts at him momentarily before smirking and being joyed at his arrival. She runs to him and jumps, swiveling in his arms before kissing him. They look like the happiest couple in the world. MJ asks how college was, and Peter says it was good, before asking how her day was. MJ will tell him that things went smoothly, their next player's coming along, but they don't think it'll be a while before it gets done. Peter then asks MJ if she's excited for their date tonight. MJ asks, what date? Aren't they going out for his birthday soon? And Peter says yes, but he's planned this for a while. He's saved up enough money to take them both out. On him. Just the both of them. MJ's face lights up as she kisses him once more. We cut to them both getting ready to go out. Peter is flicking through his phone, reading up on articles about Professor On's wife. He will ask MJ if she knew about it, and she'll say no. Peter will read a headline from the New York Times that will say Mrs. On was shot in a back alley in Queens on July 14th, 2012. That's mental, Peter will think to himself. He never would have known. However, Peter ends up pushing this aside as they go out for their date. Peter hides the ring in his back pocket, growing more nervous by the minute. When they sit down at their table, MJ can clearly see how nervous he actually was, and asks him what's wrong. Peter simply replies, nothing, but MJ could tell. Every second felt like a minute, and every minute felt like an hour. The time was coming, but Peter had no idea what to do with himself. He needed something to break the inner silence. And in the nick of time, an excuse arose for Peter to run from his fear, screaming from outside. Annoyingly, this ruined their big night, but Peter low-key felt relieved. More time to ponder, he'll think to himself. Peter rushes outside as MJ gives him the go-ahead, and he spots something rather strange. A few blocks down, a man fully white head to toe, covered in black spots. Peter changes outfits quickly and rushes over to investigate. The man, who Peter nicknames the Spot, sounds terrified. He profusely apologizes to the people who run from him on the street. Spider-Man asks who is he, and the man says he doesn't know what's going on. Spider-Man says they can get him help, as Peter outstretches his arm and offers his hand out to him. As the Spot offers his hand back, something shoots from his fingertips. Peter's spider sense reacts in time for him to dodge out the way. The man cries, saying he doesn't know what's going on, and Spider-Man says to stay calm, because whatever is happening is getting worse. The man says he can't, as an outburst of emotion causes more things to shoot from him. Most of them evaporate until one lands on the street in front of them. As Peter looks around, the absolute worst scenario that could occur became reality. Peter fully realized what was going on. People, lampposts, and cars were all started to be sucked towards it. It's a singularity, Peter would think to himself. As Peter could start to feel his feet slip, he shouts to the man to shut it down, do something! The black hole rips through the ground and starts to make a crater in the earth. Sirens start blurting as Peter looks up to the sky. The world is about to end. As they knew it, Peter looks over to the restaurant with MJ stood looking outside towards the scene. As their world collapsed around them, all they could think about was each other. The end is near. The Spot panickingly opened another singularity and jumped through it. Screw it, Peter thought to himself. What is there left to lose? And in a moment of life or death, Peter follows the Spot through the same portal, and silence. New York ambience filled the air. One eye opened, followed by the next. On top of the Chrysler building awoke Peter Parker. He jolts up panting, sweating, heart racing. He looks around at his hands. He's alive. He knows that much. What is going on? He looks down towards the city. Everything is okay. Did he just dream that? He'll reach into his back pocket to see the ring is still there. Still intact. He'll take a breath. What just happened? Where is he? What is going on? Peter's mind ponders to the different possibilities. However, in the distance, all of a sudden, a little girl screamed as falling rubble and debris started crashing down her way. Peter's spider sense ignited ferociously as he swooped down, and with about 10 seconds to spare, Spider-Man swung in to save the day, placing the little girl down. He asks if she's okay. The girl says yes, as tears start to well in her eyes. Police cars suddenly rush past, as Peter finds himself in the middle of another crisis. Maybe it's the Spot, he'll think to himself. And that's when a bright red figure whooshes past in one direction. Peter squints. It can't be. Is he seeing things? And with that, another figure whooshes past as well. Oh my god. It's Venom and Carnage. What the heck, Peter will think to himself. What are they doing back in New York? Especially Cletus. And that's when he saw a third figure on the scene. A bright red and blue costume caught the side of his eye. Who is this? Another symbiote? You can't be serious, Peter will ponder. But that's when he realized. Wait a minute. He's been here before. That's not another symbiote. That's him. Peter sees a newspaper thrown away on the side of the street. He picks it up. It's the Daily Bugle. Expecting all of this to somehow be explained, he awaited to see the year 2012 to be printed out on the front. But when he actually read it, it read 2009. Peter's eyes will widen with shock. He webs up to a building above and takes his mask off. 2009? This can't be right, surely. Peter panics. He goes down to the streets, asking people what year it was, and for sure every single one of them said 2009. That's when it clicks. The black hole that he went through. It sent him back in time. Not only was it a black hole, it was a wormhole. Peter will say this is heavy, as he sits down to take it all in. The spot can open wormholes, a rip in space and time that allows past travel. How and why? That doesn't matter at the moment. Peter says he's going to have to figure that out later. But all Peter needs to focus on doing now is getting back to the future. We then cut to another place. Another time. It's white. In fact, it's blindingly white. Nothing but emptiness. In the crevice appears the man with black holes. The spot. He panics. How did he get here? What is going on? Loads of thoughts will run through his mind. He'll say to himself, he's a scientist. All he has to do is just think about this logically. Around him as he floats through this white dimension, spots start appearing around him. But not any regular spots. There will be events playing in them. His birth, his birthdays, his first kiss, his first major job interview. And that's when he realizes he's not in any old place. He has entered the fourth dimension. A place where time doesn't exist. A place outside of time. A place where any point in time can be accessed. And that's when he sees one particular event. He watches on, as in a dark alleyway, in a warm night in Queens. He walks with his wife. Knowing what happens next, all he can do is turn and look away as he hears the gunshots in the background. As it's revealed, the spot is in fact Professor Jonathan On, and he's just watched his wife's death all over again. Afraid and scared, he looked in the opposite direction, afraid to see his loss. And that's when all the spots, all of the events in his life transform into the same thing, all replaying the same event, over and over and over again. The dreaded gunshot played again, and again. He's stuck, and he can't get out, and all he can do is suffer. Meanwhile, we cut back to future Peter, stuck in 2009. He thinks to himself that he's gonna have to stay off the radar. Time travel is dangerous, and if time travel movies have taught him anything, it's to never interact with yourself. Peter hatches a plan. He has to get out of here before he disrupts anything, and there is only one man who can help him. 2 years before they were meant to initially meet, Peter approaches the classroom at ESU campus of Professor Jonathan On. If there's one man who knows anything about black holes, wormholes, or time travel, it is this man. Peter thinks this is the only man who can help him. However, when Peter enters, the lights flicker on, and no one is there. Peter looks around and looks towards where he'd usually sit in the middle of the classroom. He walks down the lecture hall stairs and makes his way to On's desk. He notices blueprints, and that's when it clicked. Those are the same blueprints from before. The one with the machine on the front. Before Peter could discover anything more, the professor enters the room. He asks Peter, "Who the hell are you?" And Peter responds quickly, saying that he needs his help. On will say that he doesn't know who he is, and if he wants to see him, either sign up to his class or make an appointment, as On sternly rushes Peter out of the door. Peter will say that they know each other, just not yet, from another time, as he is quickly trying to explain the situation. And that's when On stops in his tracks, and his eyes widen. Peter says he knows On from the future, and he desperately needs his help. We cut to On sitting on his desk with one head in his hand, contemplating everything Peter was telling him, as Peter explained the entire situation leading up to this moment. Professor On asks for proof, as Peter shows him a receipt for the ring that he bought for MJ in his pocket, with 2012 printed as the date. He explains that he came from the future and he needs his help to get back there, using some kind of wormhole. On will say, "Does this mean that my machine worked?" Peter says he didn't come through his machine. Some guy sent him here. A guy with holes. On's eyes light up as he pulls out a sketch from his drawer. He will ask Peter if he looked anything like this, as he shows Peter a picture of a man with black holes printed over his skin. Peter says, "Yeah, kind of like that." Professor On will tell Peter that from his calculations and predictions, this is what could happen if his device failed, which could only mean one thing. Peter says he'll need to go back just before whatever happened, so he can stop or warn someone or something. He needs to get back before the entire world gets decimated. Professor On will go on to ask Peter who used it. Who used his machine and turned themselves into that freak? And Peter says he doesn't know. On will say, well, whoever it was must have been pretty desperate to take that risk. And then something clicks in Peter's head. He thought about what On told him in the future. And that's when Peter will say he might think he has an idea. Professor On will ask who, and Peter will say, you did. On will say that's absurd. He would never take such a risk, and he wants further details from Peter. Peter is hesitant to say it first, saying to On that whatever he tells him can affect time, and he can't screw anything else up. On says that he won't help him if he doesn't tell him. And that's when Peter concedes, saying that his wife dies. And putting together the pieces, Peter realized that it was probably Professor On of the future trying to use the device to go back in time and stop his wife's death before it happened. And then he turned into the spot. On will sit down and place his hand on his heart. He tells Peter that he must be lying. Peter says he's not. That's the goddamn truth. On agrees to help Peter, but he can't promise anything will work. His machine isn't ready yet, and Peter will say to let him help. And as they get to work, we enter a montage of the Professor On of the past becoming friends and taking a liking to Peter of the future. Sort of showing us how Peter and On became friends in the future. Really trying to home in on and flesh out that relationship. After countless hours of work overnight, Professor On will say it's done. Peter does one final check through the calculations to make sure everything is on point, and notices one thing is off. The proportion of energy is ever so slightly too high for what the machine can handle. He remedies the calculation and everything is set to go, and Peter steps into the machine. Before he leaves, On asks Peter one final question. Where does his wife die? Peter says he can't tell him that. On holds his head down. Peter concedes due to the friendship that he's built with On over the last 12 hours. Professor On is helping Peter get back to the future. This is the least he could do, he would think to himself. He'll say summer 2012. Avoid dark alleys. On will nod to Peter and thank him. Peter will thank On as he flicks the switch, and Peter nervously awaits as the machine turns on, praying it doesn't turn him into the spot, or worse. Peter is sent through a white-like dimension, and everything twists and turns around him, time dilating in front of his eyes. And then he lands back in New York. He looks around for a newspaper or something. He picks up the nearest one to him. It's an article by Frontline, with the date 2012 written on top. Peter breathes a sigh of relief. He's home, and by the looks of things, no sign of the spot. It worked. The device worked. Maybe whatever calculation Peter fixed may have just saved the entire world from being crushed into a singularity. And with that, Peter swings home. He walks up to his apartment stairs and reaches the top. He reaches into his back pocket, the ring nervously awaiting him. He opens the door, and surprise! Happy birthday banners stricken across his apartment. But as he looked down, his eyes widened, and his heart pounded. His teeth quivered with mass amounts of dread. Gwen? Captain Stacy? MJ? All stood in front of him, and out the background, a woman stepped from the kitchen holding a cake. Peter couldn't believe his eyes. It was Aunt May. They all gathered round Peter singing happy birthday, but the world went quiet as their voices drowned out. How did this happen? Is this Mysterio's doing? This has got to be some kind of illusion, surely, Peter would think to himself. And then that's when he realised. The little girl that he saved earlier out of instinct, that was the girl that Captain Stacy saved. That was the moment George Stacy lost his life all those years ago. And Peter prevented it. He stopped it. And here in front of him lies the remnants of the new timeline that he has now created. MJ walks over to him and kisses him on the cheek, wrapping her arms around him, telling him they're sorry they couldn't pull this surprise birthday party on his actual birthday, which was in a few days. Gwen unfortunately wouldn't have been able to make it, and George was on duty, so today was the only day. Peter, still trying to fathom what is going on, sheepishly says that's okay, still trying to process everything that's happening, his eyes flickering between George and May. For Peter it was like seeing ghosts. These were people that he lost, people that died, but they're here, alive and well. Aunt May says she forgot some applesauce for the dinner that they're having tonight, and makes her way towards the door. However, Peter intervenes, saying he can go and get some, trying to get out and get some fresh air. Aunt May will tell him, that's alright dear. She doesn't mind. It's his birthday after all. Aunt May leaves through the front door, as Peter watches on in disbelief. He turns back to face George and Gwen. Gwen tells Peter that he looks really stiff, asking if everything is okay. Peter says everything's fine, he just had some trouble on his swing over here. And then George flicks a stern eye towards him. Peter, confused, stops in his tracks. Gwen knew he was Spider-Man before, but does she now? There are so many things in this new timeline that Peter doesn't know. He has to tread carefully, and that's when George pulls him aside for one moment as they step outside. George tells Peter that he thought they had an agreement not to tell Gwen, to leave her out of this. Peter will say, yeah, he's sorry, it's just been a long day, he wasn't thinking straight. George will say it's fine, he just wants to keep her safe, that's all. And that confirms it. Because Captain Stacy is alive, it meant that Gwen never moved away, which meant that Peter somehow never ended up revealing to Gwen that he's Spider-Man. George heads back inside while Peter stays out for one moment, trying to process everything that's going on. But then he thinks, maybe this isn't so bad. They always say in time travel movies, never mess with time, but everything is perfect. All the people that he's lost in his life are back and alive. Maybe things have actually turned out okay for Peter Parker after all. Peter heads back inside, happy, embracing this new life that he accidentally created for himself. He sits down at the table as he digs into cake. This is the life Peter always wanted, and now it's a reality. After everything's settled, George has to go. He's up early the next morning and he offers to drop Aunt May off in Queens as well. Aunt May thanks him for the offer as they leave Peter and MJ's apartment. A few moments later, Gwen says she's going to get going as well. Peter says he'll walk her back to hers and tells MJ he'll be back in a few minutes. On their way back to Gwen's, they'll both catch up with one another. The first time that Peter has spoken to Gwen in years. Gwen will tell Peter that she's thinking about going to college to study biology. And they generally talk about normal school-related stuff. But all the while, Peter is just so bewildered. He's talking to Gwen Stacy. Gwen Stacy, the one that moved away. He hasn't spoken to Gwen in years, and this is crazy, he'll think to himself. In this scene, we also learn a lot about Gwen, since we haven't seen her since Season 4. This is the moment where we get to know what she potentially would have been up to if the events of Season 4 didn't transpire. They reach Gwen's apartment, and they say goodnight to each other. However, just before Gwen could enter her block, Peter collapses to the floor. Gwen turns around swiftly to see Peter on his hands and knees. She asks if he's okay, and Peter says, yeah, he's okay, he didn't know what came over him. Maybe he's just lightheaded, he says. Gwen nods and leaves, entering her apartment block. Peter thinks that was weird. What was that about? And then halfway down the street, it happens again. A glitching sensation, his body almost rejecting itself. It's like reality around him is being warped. He eventually makes his way home when he cuddles on the sofa with MJ. They're watching a film, but Peter is frozen still. MJ asks what's wrong. He's been acting weird all day. Peter says he's fine, as he gets up and goes to the bathroom. He ponders over what just happened. He looks in the mirror, and sure enough, he starts glitching again. This time it's more painful, and lasts for longer. After everything he's been through in the last 48 hours, surely something else can't go wrong. But after pondering to himself, he comes to a conclusion. The only valid explanation as to what is going on is this reality is rejecting him. It sounds like a really corny sci-fi movie, but that's the only explanation he has. He changed time, and now time is fighting back. He messed with something that should have ultimately been out of his hands. This moment in the film becomes the embodiment of Spider-Man and what it means to have the great responsibility. Peter doesn't know the consequences, but is he willing to find out? After all the loss and all the grief that he has been put through over the years, he somehow ended up in a timeline where everything was perfect. However, as we know, Spider-Man's life is never perfect. All the right people were around him and life was good, but at what cost? And now, with what looks like time and reality fighting back, Peter has to make the noble sacrifice to lose those he loves once more. This moment, this decision, will be the hardest Peter has ever had to make, but this is the culmination of responsibility for the spectacular Spider-Man. All he has to do now is prove he has the grit, prove he has the fight to do what's right. Peter looks at himself in the mirror and sheds a tear. He knows what he must do. He knows he has to fix this. He knows what's going on because he knows this timeline isn't ultimately right. He can't lose Aunt May again, though. He can't lose Gwen or Captain Stacy again. But whatever he is, whatever he's created isn't natural, and the outcome could be much worse if he doesn't do anything about it. What happens once Peter's gone? Will they go for Aunt May next? Will they go for MJ next? Will they go for Gwen next? Who knows? What if the entire universe comes collapsing down because of Peter? He knows what he has to do. Thunder claps New York's skyline as it pours with rain. Peter makes his way to an address on the outskirts of the Bronx. There is only one man that can help him. The man that he's turned to several times before. He knocks on the door, and a woman opens up, saying, "Can I help you?" Peter says he's looking for Professor On. The woman takes a step back and looks around. She says she doesn't know what kind of sick game he's playing and for him to leave her alone as she tries to close the door, but Peter holds it open, saying it's urgent. The woman says, "You don't understand, do you? Jonathan On is dead." Peter, confused, asks, "How?" The woman quivers. She says that she should know because she's his wife. And that's when it hits Peter, as we flash back to when Peter told On about how his wife would die. The event that was meant to kill Jonathan's wife killed him instead. Peter tells Mrs. On that he was a friend of Jonathan's. We then cut to a scene of Mrs. On and Peter talking in the kitchen. She makes Peter a hot cup of coffee. She asks him how he knew John. Peter says he's an old friend from ESU. She asks if he's a student, and he says kind of, but he knew Professor On a little bit better than just a student. After a few moments of reflection, she asks Peter why he needed to see him, what was so important. Peter tells her what she's about to hear won't make much sense, but his research that he was doing on wormholes and time travel, it worked. And as Peter finished that sentence, he glitched out again, smashing the coffee all over the floor. This startles Mrs. On, as she asks if Peter is okay. Peter gets back up and says he's fine, but he needs to see On's research, because whatever is going on with him is going to get a lot worse if he doesn't do something. As Mrs. On leads him into the professor's workspace at her house, Peter asks if she knows where the machine is. And Mrs. On says, what machine? And Peter says, the machine that makes you time travel, the wormhole machine. And then she'll remember as it clicks in her mind. That machine? Professor On destroyed it 3 years ago. Peter places his head in his hands. Mrs. On goes on to tell Peter that he destroyed it because he saw how dangerous it could become and was scared of the outcome and the consequences of it. Peter asks if she knows where any of this research is. She takes him to a cabinet with muddled files. She says these are what's left of his research and that Peter can have them. Peter picks them up. It's the same blueprint that he saw earlier. He thanks Mrs. On and she says it's okay. Peter leaves as he heads to ESU. We then cut back to present-day Spot in the White Dimension. Time isn't relevant for him, but we get the impression that he's been stuck there for eternity, watching the death of his wife over and over again. Insane and numb, the Spot anger fueled him to the brim. And that's when it happened. The visions of his wife's death started to change and mold into something different, something a little bit more sinister. Instead of his wife dying, he could see himself dying, getting shot instead. This confused him at first. However, he started to glitch, similar to Peter who resided inside the timeline. He pondered for a second before seeing flashes of Peter. The events of the timeline changed in front of his very eyes. Peter changing events in front of him, leading to his own death. During this time, On would find out that Peter is Spider-Man too. All his pent-up rage and anger had to be directed somewhere, as he glitched and reality started to wipe his presence from the universe. He found the cause. Peter Parker is the problem. We will then cut back to Peter as we get a montage of him progressively getting worse. The glitching is really slowing him down, but in the process he builds the machine by himself using ESU resources, showing his intelligence and intellect. This will really show how smart Peter actually is, and how far he's come as a character. After moments of determination and hard work, the machine is done. He then goes on to map out his plan. He'll narrate to us over as he talks us through his plan. He has to return to 2009, stopping himself from saving the girl, and to let Captain Stacy do it to return time to the way it naturally took its course. Then go to Professor On's office, and leave a note correcting the misfired calculation, and then return back to 2012, and hopefully everything is in check and back to normal, and hopefully he will have fixed reality and this whole mess. But before he goes, there are a few stops that he has to make first. We cut to Peter outside of Gwen's apartment. He rings the doorbell and she answers. She asks what is Peter doing here? It's late, and Peter says that he needs to talk to her. She invites him inside, and Peter will go on to say that there is something that he's wanted to tell her for a long time, that he should have told her a long time ago. Gwen is confused and she squints her eyes, her heart beating, not knowing what to say. Peter will say that he's wanted to tell her before she found out from someone else, or something else. He will say that she deserves to know, and then he'll say it. I am Spider-Man. Gwen doesn't believe him at first, and she even laughs, but Peter webs something from the table with his web shooters, startling Gwen, catching her off guard. Peter realizes that if he is to leave this timeline and course correct everything back to the way it was meant to be, this timeline will cease to exist, and the old one will return, which means that this version of Gwen won't remember any of this. If we remember back to seasons 3 and 4, he was never able to tell Gwen he was Spider-Man how he wanted to, and that was a great regret that has haunted him ever since. Well, now Peter can finally return to that moment in season 4 and have peace of mind that he did the right thing. Gwen will ask Peter why he's telling her this now, and Peter will say it doesn't matter why, just that he thought that she should know, and that it was the right thing to do. Confused and baffled, Gwen watched as Peter swung away into the night. As Peter scaled the New York skyline, he felt into his back pocket, the ring still there. And then in an instant, another glitch, this time more powerful and more painful than before. He doesn't have much time left, Peter will think to himself. He gets back up. One more stop to go. We cut to Queens, Forest Hills. Spider-Man swings over to his old home, the home that he grew up in. He changes into his civilian clothing and makes his way to the front door. He knocks, eagerly anticipating an answer, and of course, the door opens. A bright smile comes across Peter's face. Aunt May stands in front of him. She'll tell him that he's silly for knocking, why didn't he just come in? And Peter says he's giving her space, he doesn't live here anymore. May brushes it off, as she asks him if he wants a drink. Peter will say he's okay. May sits down with him on the sofa, and asks what brings him by. She knows he's very busy nowadays with college. But before Peter could speak, May excitedly asks about Mary Jane as well, asking how her acting career is coming along. Peter says it's great, but that's what he came here to talk about. Peter pulls out the ring from his back pocket. May says, that isn't what I think it is it? Peter says it is. He's going to ask Mary Jane to marry him. Aunt May in pure excitement brings Peter in for a big hug. Peter smiles and embraces the hug as tightly as humanly possible. She pulls away and says, that's great news. Peter tells her there's just one issue. Every time he wants to ask the question, he quivers and gets all nervous. He doesn't know what to do, and he wants to make it as special as humanly possible for her. Aunt May says, that's totally normal to be nervous for this sort of thing. Uncle Ben was. She will stand up and walk over to a picture frame on the wall. She'll take it down and bring it over. It's a picture of her and Uncle Ben, just moments after he proposed to her. Peter chuckles, commenting on how young they are. May will say that if Ben were here, he'd tell you exactly the same thing. Just do it. It doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter what you're doing. Because the very act of you getting down on one knee and asking that girl to marry you is special no matter what. She'll go on to tell Peter that, in all fairness, when she was younger, she had this grand idea that everything had to be perfect. There had to be candles, roses, and confetti, and everything. But when Ben did it, nothing else around mattered. Everything else disappeared because the only thing that was in focus was Ben Parker sat there on one knee holding a beautiful ring. May will outstretch her finger to see the very same ring from that day. She'll place her hand on Peter's shoulder and tell him not to worry about where he does it or how. May will ask if they're happy and if they both feel as if it's time, and Peter will say of course, and Aunt May will say then there's nothing in your way. There is nothing stopping you, only in your head. Peter hugs Aunt May and thanks her. A slight conjure of tears forms in Peter's eyes. Peter needed that. He needed to hear those words. One final lesson before he lost her for good. And as Peter leaves, he watches Aunt May go back to her nightly routine. He can't watch, but he knows for the greater good, the fate of reality could be in his hands. He says goodbye, one final time, as a tear rolls down his cheek. Without another moment's to spare, he makes his way back to the machine, turns it on, and makes his way back to the year 2009. He arrives in New York. It's game time for Peter, he'll think to himself. He has to act quickly. He sees himself about to swing down to save the little girl, and in a moment of no hesitation, he webs himself, pulling himself back. Past Peter is confused, asking what the hell is he doing, as he instantly fades from existence. Peter watches on as he takes his mask off, as Captain Stacy saves the girl, and the rubble lands directly in his path. Peter cries, reliving the same pain for the fate of the universe, for the fate of time, for the fate of reality. The most noble sacrifice to lose those who he loved, and that is the great responsibility that he lives for. After regaining himself as the battle in the distance between Venom, Carnage, and himself rages on, he travels to Professor On's office and drops off a note with the right calculation on. Quickly, before Peter could interfere with anything else, he returned back to the future, having of course corrected his mistakes. Peter checks a newspaper. Frontline, the year 2012. He's back. He looks around. Everything seems to be fine. No sign of the spot. No sign of the world collapsing in front of him. He checks his hands. The glitching has stopped. He's done it. He's won. Finally. But before Peter could relax fully, a hole starts to form in front of him, and a hand dramatically crunches itself onto the New York street. Peter watches as none other than the Spot makes his way out from the fourth dimension, escaping back into the real world. He looks to Peter's way, gritting his name between his teeth. Peter, in a fighting position, questions how he still exists. The Spot tells Peter he's been trapped in that hell for thousands of years, and now Peter is going to suffer for everything he's caused to him. Peter, confused more than anything else, tries to break through to On, saying he's sorry about his wife, he's sorry about everything that happened. Peter tells him he's going to destroy everything if he isn't careful, and then Professor On says he doesn't care anymore, when he glitches and collapses to his knees, and that's when Peter realizes. This isn't current day Professor On. This is the Professor On that he followed into the wormhole originally. He was trapped outside of time. Peter kneels down to On, who lay on the floor powerless and weak, the glitching getting worse for him, the timeline course-correcting back to its natural state. On fades from existence in front of Peter, never to be seen again. Peter, relieved, takes a breath as he says he's sorry. He couldn't save him, but Spider-Man can't save everyone. And as the final conflict comes to a close, we cut to a few days later. Peter is making breakfast as MJ greets him good morning. They kiss and Peter says that they should go for a walk, just them both. MJ says that sounds like a good idea. After breakfast they head out. They walk through Central Park as Peter hangs tightly to the ring in his pocket. He tells MJ to turn around and to cover her eyes. MJ thinks this is slightly odd at first, but then Peter takes a deep breath, thinking back to what Aunt May said to him. He gets down on one knee and tells MJ to turn around and open her eyes. And as she does, a wave of adrenaline comes over her as she places her hands on her mouth as a glistening cyan blue ring stared her back in the face. Peter utters the words, "Will you marry me?" And with no hesitation, MJ reaches out to Peter with both arms and embraces him, saying yes, of course she'll marry him. And as we fade out, our two lovers, Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson, have their happy ending. Despite the trauma and tribulations they've faced, everything always turns out okay in the end, as our journey comes to a close. The spectacular Spider-Man story comes to an end, but a new journey awaits. We open back up one final time to Spider-Man sitting on a building holding his lunch, when an orange portal opens in front of him. He's startled and spits it out as out walks a tall, bulky man in a blue and red costume. "Peter," he will say. Peter will say, "Who the hell are you?" The man will introduce himself as Miguel. He will tell Peter that this incident with time travel almost destroyed the multiverse, or at the very least, his universe entirely. Peter, confused, says, "There's a multiverse?" Miguel will say, "Yes. What he did by saving the girl disrupted what we know as a canon event. Something that, if disrupted, can cause massive consequences, such as universes annihilating themselves." Peter asks if that's why he was glitching out, and Miguel will say yes. That was the very start of it. Peter will ask how come the universe didn't collapse when the Spot glitched out and got wiped from reality right in front of his eyes. Miguel explains that's because the Spot's death was something natural to the progressive, unorthodox nature of the universe, not a set event that cannot be undone. But Captain Stacy's death was an example of something that could not be undone. Peter will think this is mental, but Miguel will go on to commend Peter, saying that the way he managed to fix everything by himself single-handedly was impressive, and that's why he wants to give him this. Miguel throws the multiverse watch at him. As he catches it, an orange glow appears on the front of it. Peter asks, "What the hell is this?" And Miguel says it's an invite. It's an invite to the Spider-Verse, in which we cut for one final time right there. Thank you very much for watching the Spectacular Spider-Man College Trilogy. Hopefully you all enjoyed. Make sure to subscribe if you did enjoy. Make sure to leave a like on this video as well. If this video gets to 200 likes, we will do the Spectacular Spider-Man Adult Trilogy, or I'll make some kind of video detailing what Spectacular Spider-Man or my version of the character would have been getting up to post this trilogy. This is meant to be the conclusive end, however, to this series right here, right now. But like I said, if the demand is enough, I will go back, revisit it, and actually do kind of like an adult trilogy or some kind of adult film or something where we detail what he has been up to and what he is doing in the future. Thanks for watching once again, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care and peace.